Alright, hello and welcome back. It's your boy Hank Hackerson at Hank Hacks Hackers. And in today's video, we are going to be going into lateral movement and pivoting, which is a continuation in the Windows series for PenTest Plus. So this is the full path on PenTest Plus. And we've done a bunch of these things. We did the privilege escalation, local persistence, Active Directory, breaching Active Directory, and now we are in lateral movement and pivoting. So I've done videos on all of these things, and you can actually find them inside the channel, Hank Hackerson. If you just click on this little search box or the search thing right here, type in Windows, and everything shows up. So Windows Persistence Part 2, Part 1, privilege escalation, so on and so forth. So breaching Active Directory and Active Directory all itself. So all these things exist already on the channel itself, and today we're just going to go down this path inside of TryHackMe's PenTest Plus. Now, this seems to be, I think it's a subscriber-only room, which means that you need a subscription through TryHackMe. It might be a free room. I'm not sure about that, but you can always just try it, and if you can get access to it for free, that's awesome. If not, you can just do this on your own Windows machine if you have one, or if you can get a virtual machine, you could always run it against that as well. In this particular situation, we're using TryHackMe's lab to do it. So just a small request, if you actually like this video, or if you get any value from this video, or if you've gotten any value from anything on my channel at all, or if you've learned anything, the only thing that I ask is that you like, you subscribe, and you turn on the notification bell, and maybe even drop a comment in the comment section. It helps with the YouTube algorithm so that we can get more reach and get more people coming into our community. And really, that's the only thing I ask of you. All of this stuff I do for free. I post at least once a day, sometimes multiple times a day. And the whole idea is to just provide value to people like yourself who are trying to become either security operations center analysts or penetration testers, ethical hackers. And that's whatever I can do for the community, I'm definitely going to do. And the only thing that I can request is that you drop a like and a comment and maybe even subscribe, and that would really help us out. So that's really all I'm going to say about that. Without further ado, let's jump into the introduction for this room. The theme of this room is pretty similar to the privilege escalation room, where we had to we start with this main DC, the main domain controller, and we just have to kind of escalate our way and traverse our way into the other machines onto the network. And as you go through the introduction, it kind of shows you the different ways that you can connect through the network. And we have to do DNS queries, or set the DNS up with the IP address that we're supposed to be working with. And since I'm using the attack box, I'm going to be following these set of directions right here. But it's also available for every other version as well. So if you're going to use your own host and you want to use the VPN to connect, it gives you instructions for that using OpenVPN. If you have a Kali Linux machine already, it gives you instructions for that. So the first thing that we got to do is just first we got to set up the connection to the DNS server so that we can actually use all of the resources and the IPs in this network. And then from there, we're going to go into requesting our credentials. In a previous room, they would give the credentials to us, but this time we just, as soon as you're done connecting to the network and setting up to your DNS, you just navigate to this link right here, and as long as you're doing it through your connection, through your VPN or the attack box or the DNS that you set up, then it actually gives you the username and password so that you can SSH into the machine, right? So that's kind of the whole idea here, and we need to create a reverse shell so that we can in the future tasks, we're going to be doing this, and it's very important so that we know what our VPN IP address is and not the actual IP address of the attack box or the IP address of your own local machine. So this is the setup that we got to do to actually set this room up. And so I'm literally just going to follow along with the instructions that they have over here, and it's pretty self-explanatory, so it shouldn't be hard to do. I am going to use two different windows though, just so it makes it a little bit easier for me to zoom in on the window, and then you can see everything that I'm typing. And then apart from that, let me make sure that I don't mess this whole thing up. So you can actually see everything that I'm typing, and at the same time I also do correct correct setup of the whole thing. So this thing already shrunk on me because I opened it in the other window. So I'm just going to open it like this in a full screen, and it should be nice and that perfect. So from here, we're just going to open up a terminal, and I'll zoom in just so you can see the commands that I'm running. And the first command is that we want to do a systemd resolve so that we can attach our interface, which is the lateral movement interface, to the, it says the THMDC IP, which is basically the domain controller IP address, and it should be the same for everybody. At the top of the screen, it's that very top. So if let me go back here, it's this thing. So this is going to be the DC IP that they're talking about. It's that very top IP address. So first we connect to that thing, and then we attach that to the lateral movement, and then we have to set the domain for it. So we already set the interface parameter, and then now we're going to set the domain parameter, which is set domain, and that's going to be za.tryhackme.com. It's actually this systemd resolve interface lateral movement, and then this is supposed to be set DNS first, then goes the IP address 78.101, and then goes the set domain to za.tryhackme.com, and that's all good. So now to verify that this actually worked, we're going to run ns lookup on the THMDC domain controller at za.tryhackme.com, and it would help if I could spell this right. So za.tryhackme.com, there we go. So that should resolve to the IP address that we just set up, and that should connect to the interface that we just set up. And let me make sure that, oh, you know what? Here's another little trick that might help make all of this useful. So it says connection timed out, no server could be reached, because I literally have to click the start button right here first to actually start this freaking network. So, okay, so now hopefully this will end up working. Yeah, it's been a while since I've done this, as you can probably tell. So this time it should actually work. So here's the third time is a charm right here. I'm gonna give it a couple of seconds for it to fully load up, and then I'm gonna run this command, and hopefully we will actually get our resolved DNS attached to our IP address. All right, there you go, we got it. So there you go, the DNS name itself attached to the IP address itself. So now if I open up a browser and go to that link that they gave us to try to find our credentials, since we're connected to the DNS and we have our IP resolved, we should now be able to get our credentials. So it is, where do we go? We go to distributor ZA. Okay, so it's http distributor.za.tryhackme.com/creds. And that should take us to a very basic page right here. And then we do get credentials, and it's going to give us our credentials. So we go Suzanne Morris, and that's the password. So bring the terminal back up here. And something else that we need to actually keep note of is the IP address that's been assigned to our lateral movement interface. So IP add show lateral movement will show the IP address that's been assigned to our lateral movement interface. And I'm going to just copy this, and I'm going to put this literally on a new tab in my browser, just to make it super simple to do. We'll even take it to our YouTube, and I'm just literally going to put it right here, and I'm just going to leave that there so that I can, maybe even if I press enter, it'll show up in the browser description itself, or the tab description, and that way I can just read it from looking at the tab itself. So that should be good. Okay, so now we have our username and password, and we've set up our DNS resolve to the IP address, and we can actually move on to the very first task that we have here, which is going to be moving through the network. So let's see what that's all about. All right, so moving through the network basically is trying to show us what lateral movement really means, and this is probably the best visual description that we can get without having to read all of this stuff. So you do your initial reconnaissance and you kind of do research on the network and try to find a username that you can hack, so on and so forth. And then you have your initial compromise, meaning you've gotten in, right? And you have a foothold on the system. So what you need to do now is you need to escalate your privileges, because more often than not, it's very unlikely that you're going to get the root password of the system, right? So you're going to find some low-level user, and then you're going to get into the system. And from there now we need to find ways to escalate the privileges, which means that once you're inside the network, you have to do internal reconnaissance. So do more homework and enumeration on the network and try to find maybe other users inside the password file or something like that, right? And then you move laterally from one user to another user, and then maybe that person has some other type of information that you can use, and you can maintain what's something called presence, or what they also say, what's the technical term? I'm drawing a blank. I'll actually show it. Persistence. There you go. Not presence. Persistent. They said presence here and it kind of threw me off. But persistence means that you stay in the network and you don't have to keep re-exploiting the network, going from initial compromise to the foothold and then going all over this process again. So once you're in their network, you want to stay in the network. And that's what maintain presence means. And once you're here, then you can take your time trying to find any kind of root or administrator or higher level user so that you can finalize the mission and get the objective done. And this is essentially what it means to move laterally through the system, through the network. And so this is kind of the thing right here, right? So this is where the hacker is. He starts in the marketing PC, and then he's trying to connect to the code repository, but the marketing PC doesn't have access to the code repository. So he goes from the marketing PC and he does a lateral move into the dev001 PC, and the dev001 PC actually has access to the code repository. It's very, very simple. It's not a really complicated thing to understand. It's more complicated to actually pull off, right? So that's the part that makes it a little bit difficult. And so there's a lot of things that could potentially help from the perspective of the attacker, the hacker. The simplest way would be to use standard administrative protocols like WinRM, RDP, VNC, or SSH to connect to other machines around the network. This can be used to emulate regular user behaviors somewhat, as long as some coherence is maintained when they're planning to reconnect with an account. While a user from IT connecting to a web server with RDP might be usual and be under the radar, you got to be careful not to do suspicious connections, meaning, so why is the local admin user connecting to the dev001 from the marketing PCs? Like, why is that happening? That kind of seems fishy, right? So that in itself is a little bit sketch. It raises eyebrows and it makes people wonder why something like this is happening. So it's just as important to try to cover your tracks when you're doing lateral movements as it is when you're trying to do escalated privilege movements. And that's what's really important to understand. The administrators and UAC, so local accounts that are part of the local administrators group and domain accounts part of the local administrators group are also kind of intriguing for us as the attacker. The difference we are interested in are restrictions imposed by user account control, which is the UAC, over local administrators, except for default administrator accounts. So by default, local admins aren't able to remotely connect to a machine and perform administrative tasks unless using an interactive session through RDP. Because if you do it through any other version, it might just drop your permissions because they anticipated that and they accounted for it. So if you do anything other than an authorized RDP, then they're going to drop your privileges, right? So Windows will deny any administrative tasks requested via RDP, SMB, WinRM, since administrators will be logged in with a filtered medium integrity token, preventing the account from doing privileged actions, which is basically what I just said. So that's what is kind of the whole, these are some of the things that we have to keep in mind as we move along with our exercises. And this is a lab environment, so we're free to make as many mistakes as we want, but you got to understand these things when you're going into a real testing environment, because that is you can't make mistakes. Or, you know, if you want to actually hack somebody, not saying that you should, you can't make those kinds of mistakes, because as soon as they catch you, they're gonna fix that, they're gonna patch it and put some blocks up into the firewalls and all these things, and you won't be able to do that first activity anymore that got you in, right? This is kind of why it's so important to even understand this part right here. Because if they find out how you got in from here, they'll block it. They'll block whatever your path was, they'll patch it, and you no longer can do this anymore. So when you're in the system and now you're inside moving laterally and trying to maintain presence, this is all very, very important, because there's a very high likelihood that if they can't, I mean, it's almost guaranteed that if they catch what you did to get into the system, they're going to patch it and you're no longer going to be able to do it again. So that's kind of the big thing that we need to understand, along with the rest of the notes right here. So that's a really important part of moving through the network and understanding what lateral movement is. And now we get to do some fun tasks and some fun lab environment stuff to actually put some of these things into practical use. All right, so here we go. PS exec, so spawning processes remotely. PS exec is the go-to method when needing to execute processes remotely. It allows an administrator to run commands remotely on any PC where they have access. It's one of the many sysinternal tools and can be downloaded at this particular link, which takes us to the PS exec link for Microsoft. So it's a direct link to Microsoft. It runs on port 445 TCP, which is the server message block, and it requires group permissions for administrators. So the way it works is like this. You connect to the admin share and upload a service binary. PS exec uses the exec svc executable file as the name. Then you connect to the service control manager to create and run a service named PS exec svc or PSEXC svc, and associate the service with the binary that's inside this thing, right? Then create some named pipes to handle SD in, SD out, and SD ERR, which I think stands for error. And so we have the attacker, they run PSEXC SVC. I'm just going to call it whatever, the executable. They run the executable, they upload it to the service executable inside the admin share folder, and then they create and execute a service, and that goes inside the actual service. And then the service, being the victim, communicates through this little pipe that was created, and now we can do some naughty things. So to run it, we only need to supply the required administrator credentials for the remote host, and the command that we want to run, it's available under tools inside the actual machine for convenience. So first thing that I gotta do, actually, because I don't think I did this when I started the machine, is I never actually logged in via SSH into this. So I'm gonna shrink this down so the username and password is right there. And inside our shell right here, I'm gonna run the command that they gave us to SSH into a machine from where we are. So I believe it is, let's zoom in for you just so you can kind of see what's going on here. It's SSH ZA // and then the username, which is Suzanne Morris, and then at thmjmp2.za.tryhackme.com. That's that. And so, okay, that's fine. So we're going to say yes. And now they're going to ask for the password, which is password, so capital P @SSW0RD. And that should give us access. So let's see if it does. Cool, we're in. And so this is, I think, a Windows machine, right? So LS wouldn't work. Yeah, LS doesn't work. So DIR works, which is the equivalent of LS, which lists everything that you're in. PWD is not, so it's GWD, so get working, oh, current working directory, maybe that's it? No, none of that is it. So if I just do CD, there you go. Okay, that's how it works. Okay, So CD is the equivalent of print working directory, so it tells us where we are exactly. But then we can obviously just look at this thing right here too. So it says, hey, you're in this place, user Suzanne Morris, so on and so forth. So I could go into the desktop for Suzanne Morris and do a CD, and now it shows me that's where I am. If I do a dir, it says these are the things that are inside the desktop. So what they mentioned in the task documentation is that inside the tools folder, so C tools, inside that folder, there's going to be a copy of PSExec64 for us. And I wonder if we need to use that to get the flag. So, well, so we're in, so let me not jump ahead of myself here. Let's read on the rest of the instructions so we can see what else we got to do here. So we were all the way to here. So it says that to run this, we only need to supply the required credentials for the admin and whatever their password is. So I don't know if this is actually the admin password here, but it says this is available under tools in THM jump to for convenience. And this will be the command to run. And then there is, apart from PSExec, there is WinRM, and it runs on 5985. It's TCP as well, or 5986, which is TCP as well. But the difference is either HTTP or HTTPS, which is the secure version. And then required group memberships is remote management users. And so WinRM is a Windows remote management, as obviously the membership kind of implies. It's a web-based protocol used to send PowerShell commands to Windows hosts remotely. Most Windows Server installations will have it enabled by default, making it an attractive vector for attacking. To connect to a remote PowerShell session, we can use this and make that happen. We can achieve the same from PowerShell, but to pass different credentials, we will need to create a PS credential object. So you assign the username, administrator, assign the password, and then assign secure password to this command, assign credential to that command, and then run the mofo. And so once we have everything created right here, we can create an interactive session using the enter PS session cmdlet, the commandlet. So enter PS session, computer name, target, and then it's going to be credential, and then that's going to be the credential. And the target computer name is going to be basically the name of the target that we actually want to attack. And it also has the invoke commandlet, which runs script blocks remotely via WinRM. And so that could be done pretty similar to what the other one was. You just need to add script block at the very end. And in here, you could just kind of type in whatever the script is that you want to execute. Then you can do remote execution of services using SC, which is something that we discussed in one of the previous videos for Windows. And that runs on 135, 445, and 139. This is 135 actually, and then these ports as well. So it literally runs on all of the ports at the very, very end. TCP, and then 445 TCP over SMB, server message block, and then 139 are over SMB as well. And this requires administrator group privileges. And so these can also be leveraged to run arbitrary commands, since they execute a command when they start, while a service executable is technically different from a regular application. If we configure a Windows service to run any application, it'll still execute and fail afterwards. So we can create a service on a remote host using the service executable, and when using it, it'll try to connect to the service control manager remote service through RPC in a few different ways. So the first one is that there's going to be an attempt to connect using DCE RPC. The client will first connect to the endpoint mapper, and then through port 135, which serves as a catalog of all different endpoints, and then it requests information on the service control manager. The EPM, the endpoint manager, will then respond with the IP and port to connect to the service control manager, which is usually a dynamic port between this range. So this is the client. They say, hey, where's the service control manager? On port 135. Then it says service control is on port 50,123. And then we try to bind to it using port 50,123, right? So once we find out what port it's actually running on, or I guess it says if that fails, then it'll try to reach the control manager through server message block, either on port 445 or 139. So bind to known pipe from service control manager, port 445, for example. So I guess if this fails, it's just gonna do a fallback to that. And once we have that, we can create a service called the service name using this command, and then we can start the service using that command. The net user command will be executed. So right here, net user, add. So we're saying add this user with this password, add it, and start on automatic. So once we actually run this thing, it's going to add that user with that password. So then it's going to create a local user, so on and so forth. Since the operating system is in charge of starting the service, you won't be able to look at the command output. To stop it, you do stop. To delete it, you do delete. And that's pretty much it for services. And then we have scheduled tasks being created remotely. And you can create and run one remotely. You can create a scheduled task remotely, available in any Windows installation. And we can create something called this with the following command. So scheduled tasks, S being the target, RU run under the system, and then create this thing, and then TR would be the command that we want to execute. And then so run it once, and then this would be the date at that time. And then so you do that, the tasks again, target, run. So now we actually want to run the task that we just created. So we set the schedule type to once, which means that the task is intended to be run only once at a specified time. Since we'll be running the task manually, the starting date and starting time won't really matter much. Since the system will run the scheduled task, the command's output won't be available to us, making this a blind attack. Finally, to delete it, we can just run this command to delete it, because again, we got to cover our tracks, right? It's just one of those things that you can't mess up. So now to complete the exercise, we need to connect to THM Jump 2, which we already did. And if you don't have one, we're going to go create it, so on and so forth. This is how we SSH to it. For this exercise, we will assume we already have captured some credentials with admin access. So this is going to be our admin as well as their password. So we'll show you how to use those credentials to move laterally using sc.exe. Feel free to try other methods, so on and so forth. So from this part, since we've read most of the stuff, all of this, I'm actually, instead of just reading through it, I'm actually going to execute all of these commands so that we can retrieve our flag, because it doesn't really make sense to read and then to execute. So now we're here, we're already inside our shell using the credentials that we just got. And as you just saw, we also have some admin credentials that we just received. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to use MSF Venom to create, and I'm just going to shrink this down because we don't need that anymore. We're going to open up a new terminal, and then inside the new terminal, we're going to use MSF Venom to create a payload for ourselves that we will then use to transfer to the service and so on and so forth. So okay, so here's what we found out. Here's what I learned so far, okay? First and foremost, a couple of these steps were actually unnecessary. Secondly, we needed to use the VPN IP address to pull this off instead of the actual attack box IP address. And yeah, that's honestly, those are like the two big things. The first step that we got to do is use MSF Venom to create the payload. And so as you saw me try, or maybe I may even honestly cut that entire thing out, because it ended up being kind of, I was running around in circles for a long time until I finally found the answer. So the first thing that we need to do is create the payload. Okay, so this is what happened. And I created the payload, and it's called owned.exe. And then the next thing that we need to do is we need to transfer the payload using SMB client into the Windows machine for the admin share. And so I did that as such. So I did SMB client, put owned under Leonard Summers username and password. We're going to put it inside the admin share. And this was Leonard Summers password, okay? And so it did that. It put owned inside that. And then the next thing I did was I went over here and I created a netcat listener running sudo under LVP for port 4445, because that was the port that was assigned to our payload right here, okay? So we did that. And then we had already SSH'd into Leonard Summers. And if you don't know how to do that, or if I cut that out for whatever reason, because I don't know what the final edit of this is going to look like, this is how you do the SSH as Leonard Summers. So you would SSH ZA // and then put his actual username right there at jump to and then it'll ask you for his password, and you put his password and you get a secure shell as Leonard Summers, okay? And so when you get the secure shell as Leonard Summers, this is where they kind of give extra information that's kind of really unnecessary. So after we put the share, or after we put the executable inside the share, they tell you to do this whole thing with MSF console and all this extra BS that is literally unnecessary. None of it is even necessary, okay? None of this is necessary. This is the one-line version of this whole thing. Unnecessary. The only thing that you got to do, and actually even this was unnecessary. So this was unnecessary, and this piece is unnecessary. The only thing you got to do is you got to run these commands as Leonard Summers. So that's it, right? So you create the payload, you transfer the payload to the admin share, you create a netcat listener, and then as long as you're SSH'd inside Leonard Summers, you go ahead and you run the two commands that they said. So sc.exe, I want you to create, this is the domain that we're supposed to be on, so I want you to create this thing called super owned. And so here's another quick little thing. If you try to run this exact command right here, they're going to say this exists already, and that's not going to work. So you got to create a different name for your executable. So I just put super owned, and then the binary path is going to be the same path, and it's going to point to the name of the payload that we made right here, which is this thing. So this was the payload that we made. So it's going to point to that path, and it's going to start automatically. It says create service success, and then the next command is to actually start that service, and it did. And as soon as it did, my netcat listener right here updated, and then when I looked for host name, my host name is THMIIS, which means that now I can actually search around and try to find this flag.exe that would be on Leonard's desktop in this situation. So if we go to C right here and do a dir, we should see a bunch of things including users. So we go into users and we do a dir. There's Leonard Summers T1, so T1 Leonard Summers. We do a CD into that. I misspelled it. There's that, and we do a dir in here, and he has his desktop, so we go into here and we do a dir in here, and there is the flag.exe. And you run that, and there's your flag. So this entire section, everything from this all the way up to this, is absolutely unnecessary. It had me running around in circles, and hopefully you won't have to deal with that because I will cut it out in the edit. but this, you guys, I got so annoyed, man. I was like, what the fuck is going on here? So anyways, if you just avoid this whole freaking ordeal right here, and all you do is just create your payload and then transfer it, and then from there come down and okay, so you got to make sure that you're SSH. So I'll run it exactly as this: SSH as Leonard Summers, have one shell open as Leonard Summers. Then you're going to open up another terminal and you're going to create the payload, and you're going to transfer the payload in the other terminal. And then in this same terminal, you could just run your netcat listener, which would be this thing. And then just make sure that you do it on the same exact port that you assigned to this. So if this is 4444, this should also be 4444, not whatever BS they're saying. And then from here, we're going to go back inside the command prompt that we had with Leonard Summers as our SSH. And then we're going to run this to create a new service. You're going to assign a new name to it, not this name, because this already exists. So just assign whatever name that you want to it. And then make sure that you're pointing it to the name of your payload that you created with MSF Venom. And then run the start service. And you will have your reverse shell, as you can see right here, and then you can go into his desktop and you can run that flag. That took way longer than I wanted it to take. And I think I might have enough time to do one more, but I feel like I'm also gonna just literally cut this off right now, and we're gonna come back to this. Yeah, I'm just gonna cut this off right now because that took way longer than I wanted to, and I still have to do the editing for all of the episodes that I recorded today. So we just finished spawning processes remotely, and in the next episode we're going to go into moving laterally using WMI, which is what is this? Windows Management Instrumentation. So we're going to go do that in the next episode, and hopefully I'll have better luck and I won't be running around in circles, and I can do multiple of these tasks in the next video. But for now, this is where we're at. It's your boy Hank Hackerson at Hank Hacks Hackers, your favorite network and system attacker. And this is it for this particular room. So we're just gonna kind of do the next episode with the next series of tasks. If you got any value from this video, if you learned anything from this video, if I saved you a little bit of time from running around in circles, or if you were entertained by me losing my shit, then please by all means like, subscribe, and turn on that notification bell, and please drop a comment inside the comment section below, because it really does help with the algorithm and it helps us get more reach so that we can expand this community. So that's kind of where we're at. That's where we're at right now, and yeah, that's pretty much it. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned from this. Peace, love, and chicken grease. If no one else loves you, Hank loves you. I'll see you in the next episode.